There are two really important pieces of information that you want to consider when you are trying to determine a pattern rule, especially from a picture. We'll look at them separately. The first important concept is what is the constant in this pattern? So I'm just going to write down the word constant so we don't forget that. So the constant is the part of the pattern that never changes. So in order to figure out what the constant is, you actually really should go back to term zero. So if I was going to go back to term zero, what would this pattern look like before term one, before I started adding anything to it? So in order to do that, I need to look at how my pattern is changing from one to two to three. What I'm noticing is that each time I look at the pattern, I get kind of this four block sort of like Tetris looking piece added on each time. So it looks to me like because in term one I start with those four blocks, that if I were to go back to zero, I actually wouldn't have any blocks at all. So my constant for this particular pattern is zero. There's nothing that stays the same from the initial pattern because we didn't start with anything. So what that means is I'm actually not going to add anything on to the pattern rule that I create. So essentially, it's like me saying plus zero when I'm making this pattern rule. The next piece of important information that I need to get when I look at my pattern is the variable. So the word variable, as I'm sure many of you know, means what's changing, what's varying each time. And if I look, what I'm doing each time is I'm adding on those four blocks. So it's plus four, plus four, plus four. So really what this would look like is term number one is 0 plus 4. Term number two ends up being my original 0 plus 4 again, because I have two groups of 4. My term number three is the original 0 plus 4 plus another group of 4 and plus a third group of 4. Now, what of course we know about repeated addition is that it's the same thing as multiplication. So if I end up with one group of 4 here in term 1, it's essentially me saying 4 times 1. If I end up with two groups of 4 here, I'm saying 4 times 2. And if I end up with three groups of 4 here, I'm essentially saying 4 times 3. Now, what you may have noticed is that 1, 2, and 3 match up with what term number they are in the pattern. Term 1, term 2, and term 3. So this helps me create what am I actually multiplying n by each time I move through a term. So I would have n times 4. So no matter what term I have in the pattern, I can multiply it by 4 to find out the total. And if I go back to what my constant was, my constant is 0. So it's n times 4 plus 0 because I have no constant that I need to add on each time. So my pattern rule then is n times 4 plus 0. And then I'm able to use this to solve what the 10th term in my pattern should be. So in order to solve for that 10th term in my pattern, all I'm going to do is substitute the number 10 in for n, and I'm going to multiply that by 4. And of course, I have 0 to add on, which I mean, I can write it or not. It doesn't really make any difference. Um, but I know that 10 times 4 is 40. So I would know that how many tiles would be in the 10th term of the pattern? There would be 40 tiles in the 10th term of the pattern. And this is how I go about using constants and variables and my pictures to solve for a pattern rule.